This video is not intended for anyone 13 or younger. Hello viewers and welcome back to Magic the Gathering's new set of Strixhaven's story. And today we're going to be continuing with the second chapter of the main story, which is entitled Lessons. And let's get a bit of a recap from the last chapter. And in the last chapter we had Will and Rowan from Eldraine finally coming to Strixhaven to learn more about their planeswalkers' abilities. And there seemed to be a few problems between those two. They're there's just something going on there with those two arguing. Hopefully, this will get a little more interesting in later chapters. Also, we have Liliana, who is Professor Onyx, and we don't know why she's here at the moment. So hopefully that'll be answered in due time. And finally, we have the returning planeswalker of Lukka from Ikoria meeting up with the Oriq. And I know I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but I'm going to do my best with pronunciation. But I'm just going to call their wizard, the group that Lukka's with right now, is just Oriq, because it's easier for me. So if you have any complaints, I get it, but I just want to get this done, and I have read a bit more, so I did screw up on the last chapter, and I'm gonna try better this chapter. Just let me know if you guys want to hear more chapters from newer sets. In later sets down the line, so let us not wait any longer and continue where the story is going to go with episode 2, Lessons. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It only takes 2 simple clicks. Click, click. Enjoy the episode. Episode 2, Lessons. Tafar didn't know how long he had waited in the cramped tunnel beneath the Bilboplex. Hours, certainly? Though it felt like far longer. He didn't feel safe moving during the day. Eventually, he had to emerge from the underground passage and cross the ravine separating the school from the surrounding woodlands. After that, he'd be in tree cover, mostly, but even that even that was no protection against being seen. This was a school full of mages. Damn it all. The best mages of all Archivos, no matter what the other Oriq said about all the under underserving brats. And what if one of the founders happened to fly overhead? He had no interest in being incinerated by Dragonflame. No, Tyvar always thought himself as a pragmatist. So very pragmat pragmatically. He waited until nightfall. He wasn't excited about facing Exodus again, not after failing his mission, but he would worry about that when he got out alive. Tyvar had seen true darkness in that professor's violet eyes. She meant to kill him. And for what? So that Exodus could have some dusty old book he remembered from however many years ago. Finally, with night fallen, he could start the hard trek home through the forest and over the rocky bluffs. It would be a long night. 3 weeks earlier, before Lukka met the Oriq mages, before they kidnapped him, in fact, he squatted against the light, his stomach still churning from planeswalking. Never a pleasant sensation. Across the grassy fields ahead of him was a small village. He could see a few people milling about. One woman was waving her hands over a row of tilted earth, muttering a growth spell, while another ordered what looked like a mud construct to drag a plow through the field. He wandered through the unpaved streets until the smell of food drew him into an inn. ignoring the stares and whispers of the other people seated at the squat wooden tables. Lukka sat down at the wooden bar. "Looking for something, stranger?" said the innkeeper, a round man with a head of robust curls. "A hot meal," said Lukka. The innkeeper hesitated as though about to say something, then nodded and moved towards the kitchen. "Haven't seen clothes like that before," came a voice behind Lukka. "You're not from around here, I imagine." He turned. A tall man in the same rough clothing as the rest of the townsfolk had stood up from his table and was walking over. "No," said Lukka, turning away. "I guess not." "You know who they say dress strange and act stranger, coming through little towns like ours to recruit?" "The Oriq," said the man behind him. His tone was far from friendly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe, maybe not. Where are you from, then?" Lukka kept his eyes straight ahead, not bothering to even look at the loud-mouthed man. "You wouldn't know it." He heard the man struck his teeth. The innkeeper still hadn't returned from the kitchen. Lukka was starting to doubt he ever would. "Okay, Oriq, I think I've heard enough. We don't take kindly to meddlers in this town, or those who seek to disrupt peace. If we were a proper city, we get the closest, least busy dragon's guard to sort you out. But we're just a small farming village, so we've learned to deal with strangers ourselves." Lukka felt, rather than saw, the rush of magic as the man began a spell. "Is everyone a damn mage on this plane?" He turned again, in one fluid motion, smashed his fist into the man's jaw. The man dropped limply. The wispy energy curled around one of the hands, dissipating. Lukka had an instant to breathe before another man crashed through the door of the inn, a ball of flame hovering above one outstretched hand. Lukka got a few steps away before the firebolt splashed against the back of his coat, knocking him through a glass of nearby window and into the street. The stank of the charred leather filled his nose, mingling with the searing pain across his shoulder. Lukka snarled and cast his senses out over the village, finding every vulnerable mind he could. He called to them, stumbling back on his feet. The fireball-throwing man had left the inn and was joined outside by two other burly-looking townsfolk. "Where are your friends? We know you Oriq scum like to travel in packs." "Oh, they'll be coming along any minute now," said Lukka. The man lifted his head and began to fill it once again with fire. Before he could finish, a dog leapt through the air, and its sharp teeth flashing as they sank into his arm. The man screamed, the flames spluttering out as he forgot to free himself. He managed to tear his arm free just as a horse charged at him. He and his companion dove out of the way, but the horse followed them. Spurred by Lukka's rage, it reared back, and then brought its hooves down hard. Lukka smirked, faded, as hunger shot through his stomach. He staggered down the road, his mind absolutely following the fight through the beasts until the noise faded behind him. Usually reflected Liliana, one did not willingly walk into a dragon's lair. Or if one did, they did also with a death wish and some very keen blades. She had never, as she approached the tangled grove where Winterbloom made her home, all she brought was with her were questions that needed answering. She pushed aside a low-hanging broth, trying to make as much noise as possible. Sneaking up on a dragon with was an even worse idea than visiting one. But the nest was empty, just a broad patch of foliage depressed flat into the earth, and Liliana felt relieved in spite of herself. Nicol is gone. What am I really shrinking from? The lair was surrounded by dark leaves trees, leaning over the default in the earth like jurors. The scent of decay mingled with the fresh earth, but Liliana knew what Winterbloom had a formidable collection of arcane writings tucked away, glowing spheres of various sizes lay tucked into a massive root structure, protecting their contents from the humid air. Maybe there was something in the books and scrolls that could help her bring Gideon back. Liliana peered into one of the globes, carefully not to get stuck in the thick mud underfoot. She was looking through her fifth sphere when the sound of wings brought her attention into the sky. Liliana took the deep breath and remembered to adjust her professor's uniform as the shadow of Winterbloom passed over her. Winterbloom circled the spot twice before landing with an earth-shattering tremor. She folded back her black feathered wings as she studied Liliana with those eerie bright eyes. Tyvar may be Tyvar may be harsh at times, but surely dealing with him is not as troublesome as trekking all the way out here, Professor. What I need isn't something the director can help me with. Winterbloom gave what Liliana thought was a curious look. I found some of your work on etheric reincorporation. Liliana pulled a pointed piece of metal from her pocket. It was the one piece of Gideon she had, a tip from one of the blades of his sword, sword, his sword. What would it take for such methods to work on humans? Winterbloom made a rumbling noise, the sound reverberating on the ground beneath her. This smells of a dangerous sort of meddling to me. Some questions are better left unanswered. I did not come here for a lecture. I just want a simple answer. When it comes to Aether, there are no simple answers. Winterbloom walked past Liliana, making her way into the deeper recess in the side of the crater. She turned and lay down, wrapping her tail around her massive form. You seek for the very essence of life. It cannot be ordered about like a pet. Resurrection, apart from baser necromancy. You understand it's fiendishly difficult, even for myself. Liliana set her jaw. And what about the child of Professor Gladeville? The dragon went still, such huge black eyes, a bottomless pit. No, that was something I will not see repeated for all our sakes. I am not some wayward student, Winterbloom. Liliana stepped towards the dragon, Gideon's blade cold in her hand. I do not need your coddling, and I do not need your protection. Perhaps not, Winterbloom said, but it is not you I would be protecting. What what do you care about humans anyway? I imagine we seem little more than insects to you. None of the founders have even been to the university in years. The dragon turned her head and closed her huge, heavily lidded eyes. The deans are more than capable of keeping order and peace, as are the dragon's guards and the oracle. She let out a little chuckle, stirring the layer of the decaying leaves and mulch underneath them. Even the archivists do their part. Liliana's nails dug deep into her palm. The dragon had to know more than she was letting on. And this was her last hope, Gideon's last hope. Please, he took my death. Help me give him back his life. Winterbloom crackled an eye open and looked at her for the moment. The wind blew over the top of the crater walls, stirring the dark trees surrounding the lair. Finally, she closed her eyes again. I cannot. A jolt of pain in Liliana's hand told her she had gripped the piece of the blade a little too tightly. She stared down at her bleeding palm, trying to calm the storm of her emotions. This wasn't a fight she could not win with force or sheer will. Liliana tucked the blade piece back into her pocket and turned to leave. She was halfway up the crater when Winterbloom spoke. The pain can be unbearable at times, but in the end, how we honor the dead is reflected in how we treat the living. Liliana looked back, but the dragon was still curled up in the side of the crater, slowly drifting towards sleep. Lukka stumbled as he moved across the stony ledge, minding his step along the edge of the sheer cliff. Far below, the short grass and scrawny trees held bitterly to life. His hunger had only grown worse, tightening his stomach more and more with each shaky step. What little food he managed to hunt down was long gone, and he ran out of water hours ago. The ledge suddenly gave way beneath him, crumbling into a loose stone. Lukka cried out, his ankle twisted. He knew he threw out his hands, reaching for anything to save him from the long fall, and his fingers caught on the edge of a sharp, flat stone. Gritting his teeth, he pulled himself up the side of the cliffs, legs scrambling for purchase, and finally threw himself back onto the stone shelf. He lay there for what felt like an eternity, his lungs burning as he sucked his gasps of air. Though his near demise faded into grays as his gaze caught on a rock that had saved him. It floated in the air, the end facing him smooth and curled. Lukka stood up, finding more of the odd rocks hovering above the side of the cliff. Together they formed a half circle, as if the rest of them were lost within the cliff itself. A small noise grabbed his attention. Lucas tensed, ready for trouble, but it came again. It seemed a pitiful sound, soft and weak. Lukka followed it until he found a pile of stones. He dropped to his knees, pushing one of the stones away. A pair of golden eyes looked back at him. The creature gave a miserable yelp, blinking against the light. As Lukka shoved the rest of the stones aside, he saw that her gray fur was dirty and covered in spots. Then that ran a camouflage pattern along her back. A long gash ran across the creature's snout, and something has taken a chunk out of one of her pointed, black-tipped ears. Free now, the fox-like creature limped past the stones. Lukka had moved, pushing more space between them. He sat down hard. The strength in his legs finally gave out. He felt faint. Go on, then. Get! The fox turned and darted around the curve of the cliff as consciousness slipped away. When he woke, the first thing he regained was her perspective. He kept still, slowly opening one eye. She sat in her hunches, a few paces away, staring at him. Then her eyes flickered to the ground beside him. Lukka followed her gaze. A pile of berries and nuts lay beside his leg. Thank you. The fox tensed, raising to her feet. Lukka started to raise his hand, but stopped himself. He stared at her, the silence stretching as the first sun began to rise the distance. Finally, Lukka took a deep breath and cast out his bonder senses. The warm brush of the fur caressed his mind as the link between them settled. It had been a while since used he used this gentler magic. Not for a servant, not for a partner. He hadn't even realized how much he missed it. Liliana pushed off the side of the towering metal torch and continued her trek back to Strixhaven. Empty-handed, she's been gone for days by this point. Days of classes that have gone untaught, meetings that had gone unattended, professional duties had gone undone. After Winterbloom's refusal to help her, she followed rumors of an archicane to the ruins of Cotterdum, but she found no massive mystical giant packed full of arcane secrets. In fact, she hadn't found much of anything. It has been for nothing, and now she would be questioned by the other professors, or worse, by Valerian and Listiel, the deans. Deans Val and Lace. An animal's screech sounded in the distance. A strangled cry came from somewhere up ahead, off the path, though Liliana could see past the thick canopy of trees. She stepped into the undergrowth, keeping low. In the clearance, not far off the path, 7 people stood in a circle. Purple magic flared around their outstretched hands, the same color as the light that wound in smoky trails around their masks. Liliana pressed against the gnarled trunk of an old tree and watched as the band of Oriq agents surrounded a large white stag. The beast bled and reared back, swiping one of the agents with its hooves. One figure fell back, but the others pushed forward, forcing it towards the metal crate that lay open behind it. Inch by inch, the stag backed into the crate as it cries splittering the air, then sharply cut off as the door of the metal box slammed shut. Liliana watched, silent and still, as they loaded the captured stag onto the wagon waiting nearby. Eventually, the creak of the wagon wheels faded into distance. In the distance, Lukka could make out the curled tail of the smoke from the chimney somewhere beyond the woodlands. In another world, another plane, he would have felt relief, finally. Somewhere soft to rest his head, somewhere to get a decent meal, where he wouldn't have to mind control rabbits into letting him break their necks. But here, in Arctos, he knew he had just get treated with the same suspicion as he had been everywhere else. The people of this plane hated everything new, everything they do not understand. Like the Oriq, like the masked mages who use magic forbidden by the colleges of Strixhaven. Whatever they meant, every villager seemed to think there was an Oriq agent hiding under their beds. In some ways, it reminds him of home, of the way General Kudrow had looked at him when Lukka had first shown his bonder's magic. This was a place ruled by fear. The sound of the raised voices pulled Lukka from his thoughts. He followed them to the other side of a ridge. Down below he could see a woman wearing immaculate robes, facing a group of masked individuals. Purple, wispy smoke curled and danced across their covered features. All wore hoods, turning their silhouette alien and inhuman. The woman did not appear concerned to be outnumbered, 4 against 1. Stretched into her robes, Lukka could make out the stylized form of a dragon. Ah, the dragon guards I've heard so much about. elite mages that had studied at the beck and claw of those scaly old reptiles. This is your last chance, the woman was saying. Turn yourself in and the masked figures didn't didn't wait for her to finish. One shot out of a hand, a coil dripping purplish energy snapping out towards her. The dragon's guard flickered her wrist effortlessly. There was a bright flash, and suddenly the coil of dark magic was flying right for Lukka. He ducked just in time, the spell hissing horribly as it flew overhead and hit a tree to his right. At once, the truck began to be, to blacken as ruts spread out from the point of the impact. Bits of dead leaves rained down onto the clearing, and the sound of cracking wood signaled immediate collapse. Lukka leapt out of the way just as the top of the tree split off and landed where he'd been standing. That could have killed me. He couldn't decide who to be mad at, the one who cast the spell in the first place, or the one who redirected it towards him. He settled on both. Lukka cast his senses out into the forest, snagging a bear on a bear claws deep in the berry bush. Further, his senses grabbed to the wolves dozing as they waited for nightfall, and he jerked them to wakefulness. Further still, he felt the strange fever of a creature that had already been creeping towards the clearing, drawing to the by the lure of magic. Lukka frowned but kept his focus, connecting with the nearby beasts. He summoned each and every one of the clearing. The Oriq agents, meanwhile, spread out to surround the dragon's guard. One of them threw a ball of crackling black flame towards her. With a gesture, she turned it into stone and dropped it out of the air harmlessly. Another conjured what looked like a snake made of glittering silvery liquid. With a spoken word, the dragon's guard caused a massive clot of dirt and grass, shaped surprisingly like a mongoose, to rip its way free to the ground before pouncing on the arcane servant. Even Lukka found himself impressed by how effortlessly she seemed to answer whatever spells they could throw at her. Behind her, a wolf pounced from the tree line, teeth bared savagely. This one almost seemed to catch the woman by surprise, but before it could reach her throat, she sealed the beast in a greenish bubble. It floated off into the air, raging helplessly against its containment. So it is true, said the dragon's guard, turning to look at him up on the ridge. We had heard of an Oriq with your abilities. For the last time, I'm not a damn Oriq, growled Lukka. As if to drive home his point, the bear burst forth from the trees by the line of masked figures, sending them scrambling as it swiped wildly through those huge killing claws. One of them threw a hex over his shoulder as he fled, withering the animal's arm and caused it to roar in pain. The sound was jolted by far less familiar sound. Lukka looked over to see the strange creature with whom he had connected burst forth from the tree line. It skittled across the clearing on 6 legs, disturbingly quick. Glowing tendrils waved from its head as if underwater. With a single-minded focus, it made straight for the dragon's guard. This was a foe she seemingly take seriously. Lukka watched her set her feet and contort her hands in an arcane position. She spoke a word, and roots as thick as his arms burst forth from the ground, wrapping around the chitinous legs of the creature. He heard a snapping of the limbs, as if it was dragged down into the earth, stretching all the while until the soil covered the insect thing with an awful finality. Lukka was drawn in by the spectacle. He didn't notice the root creeping around his own ankle until it yanked him into the soil down to his wrist. He pressed on either side of himself, trying to lift himself free, but no effect. The dragon's guard strauntered over him, clearly in no rush. Neat trick, but at the end of the day, you're nothing but an untrained hedge maze, like any other Oriq. She extended an open palm towards him. Something blurred at the edge of Lukka's vision. A second later, the dragon's guard screamed. There was a blooming of heat and a bright wash of flame, and he turned away, shielding his face with one hand. When he looked back, a familiar shape stood over the dragon's guard's still body, her fiery tail twitching as she sniffled at her fallen opponent. When she was satisfied, the fox-like creature turned and looked at Lukka, her big eyes oddly knowing. Lukka held the beast's gaze for a moment before looking around the clearing. The Oriq agents were gone. If he hadn't been there, they wouldn't have lasted more than a minute. No discipline, no strategy, just a bunch of scary costumes. Lukka dragged himself to his feet and scanned the ground nearby. Obviously, the Oriq agents had left a trail in their haste to get away. He easily spotted the signs of the masked mages had left in their wake. If everyone who doesn't play by the rules here is an Oriq, maybe I'm one of them after all. He was about to start following the trail when a short yelp made him pause. Lukka turned to find the fox-like creature sitting in the clearing. She blinked and cocked her head to one side. Lukka turned and shook his head, resigned. Fine. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. The fox's own mind seemed to leap to meet his, and the bond softly snipped back into place. Lukka let himself relieve the senses of relief and gratitude he felt when he seen her fly at the guard. He opened his eyes to find the creature watching him, her tongue hanging over the side of her blood-stained maw. She trotted over the Oriq's trail and sniffed at one of the tracks. Well, if you're going to stick around, then I need to call you something. How about Milla? He felt the pleasant ring of reconstitution in her mind and nodded. All right then, Milla it is. Exodus held his breath as he poured the simmering red liquid into a shallow bowl. It swirled into a glowing potion, arcane light welling up in strange bubbles and casting strange shadows across the walls of the cave. The red lining lightened. It was nearly white, then violet, shot through the mixture, and the potion dimmed until it was nothing more than an inert dark sludge. He smacked the ball across the room, and it shattered against the wall, leaving the failed potion seamed across the stone. That was the fourth failure. The movement caught his eyes, and Exodus looked towards the entrance to the cave. One of his Oriq agents stood there, the dark magic flaring around their mask, an unpleasant reminder. Why are you just standing there? Bring me more Zephyr essence. The agent jumped as physically struck and backed away from the cave, disappeared into the tunnel that led to the main cavern. Alone, Exodus slumped over his work table. He looked over the books spread open before him. None of them had been any use. None of them showed him how to attain the power he needed. His gaze wandered over the side of the table to the floor, where the other ritual components lay still. The mage hunter's legs were still pinned down and held in grip of the Oriq agents who now lay dead around it. All valuable tools sacrificed for nothing. Every last bit of life drained from their bodies. It wasn't enough. Someone entered the chamber behind him, and Exodus straightened. Are the rest of my supplies here? There has been a delay. They ran into a dragon's guard, said the agent. Behind his mask, Exodus grit his teeth together. He reserved a special hatred for the dragon's guard. Of all the meddlers who stood in his way, they were far the worst. So arrogant, self-assured, he was eager to show them just how misplaced all that confidence was. The Dragon's Guard, and all the rest of Strixhaven's elite with them. Not a day went by where he didn't think about that place. He could still remember walking through the Hall of Oracles. He could still see the space where his statue should have been, just to the left of the snarl. Exodus looked at the sludge now dried on the wall. If more power was what he needed, that overlapping tangle of power hidden away below the skull would offer more than enough, though reaching it would be no easy feat. The nexus of ancient energies wasn't some dusty book sitting on a shelf in the Bilboplex. It would be guarded by the most formidable forces Strixhaven could muster. Constructs, elementals, professors, Dragon's Guard. There was something else there, said the agent, drawing Exodus from his thoughts. Someone interfering. She told him about the man who seemed to be able to call beasts of the forest to do his bidding. By the time she finished, Exodus was more than intrigued. They say that he's following them now, says the agent said. Should I tell them to get rid of him? No, says Exodus, clearing his throat. He glanced at the bodies next to his table, then lifted his gaze towards the shadows overhead. The torchlight shoved on the hard exoskeletons of the dormant mage hunters as they hung from the rocky ceiling. Let him come. Behind his mask, Exodus smiled. Liliana set down the tome she had been studying and rubbed her eyes. Another day of fruitless research. She had done all that she could think of, and none of it would work. There wasn't a book or a scroll or a spell in Strixhaven that could bring Gideon back. Besides, the Oriq on the move, there were more pressing matters at hand. Nobody else seemed to be taking them seriously. She glanced out of the window behind her desk. In the distance, the suns had begun their slow descent towards the horizon. Light glinted off the floating stones of the dawn brow. Liliana stared at the star arch, her gaze tracing its curves down towards the buildings of the main campus. She'd come here to find a way to bring Gideon back. Nothing more, nothing less. But if she hasn't been here, she wouldn't have seen the Oriq agent at in the Bilboplex. Liliana hated the idea of destiny. She always thought it was someone else telling her what to do. Just another heartless master. Gideon, however, had been a great believer in believing in the right place at the right time. Maybe it was time she learned a lesson from him. Not too late, I hope. There was only so much she could do alone, though, even if the mage students spent their free time blasting each other across the campus. They weren't prepared for what was coming. She needed help. She needed power. A flash of gold outside her window caught her eye. Liliana leaned forward. A group of young students, enameled past her office. One of them stood out, her blonde hair shining in the dim light as it fell over the shoulders of her Prismari uniform. Rowan Kindrith had her Winterbloom friend's attention as she glistened wildly, her sword floating against her leg as she led the group further down the walkway and out of sight. Liliana set her back in her seat. Maybe it's time to take my role as professor a little more seriously. And that is the end of chapter 2. Well, with that out of the way, this was a very good chapter, and we got a little more information. We got a little backstory on what happened with Lukka and what happened after Ikoria and getting back to where we were when we last saw him in the first chapter. So, yeah, so he joined the Oriq agents willingly because, yeah, even in Strixhaven, this still reminds him of all the stuff from Ikoria and dealing with General Kudrow's racism against Bonders. And we also learned what Liliana's doing here in Strixhaven, trying to find a way to resurrect Gideon from death after War of the Spark, after Gideon sacrificed himself to save Liliana to get the victory against Nicobolus. So, we don't know where this is going to go, and also Liliana is thinking of getting the Will and Rowan to help her out to deal with the Oriq agents. And we finally get a name of the leader of the Oriq, Exodus, but we don't know why he hates the college, and he did say there was something about the statue that shouldn't be, that should have him. So either he was a former student, but he was exiled for doing something bad, like something very bad, and that's why he's doing this and getting his revenge on the Dragon Guard. And we'll just have to wait and see for the third chapter. So until then, I will see you all for chapter 3. And let me know if you want me to continue in later sets. Or do you want me to go back a few sets and we can do some more reading on previous sets. So until then, have a good day, everybody. And I've been your humble host, Josh24214. And I hope you enjoyed it and have a good day.